everyone. Welcome back to Bold Strokes Books' first bookathon. If you've been with us for the last few panels, thank you for being here. We appreciate you. If you're just signing in for the first time, I want to point out two quick things about Zoom. In the top right-hand corner of your screen, there will be a little icon with a bunch of small boxes. That is called Gallery View. That will allow you to see the panelists in the best view. And at the bottom of your screen, there is an icon that says Q&A. That is where you post your questions for our panelists. The chat role is just for commentary. You can chat to each other or chat to the panelists. But the Q&A box is for specific questions for the panelists. So I'm now going to hand it over to Ashley Bartlett for this YA new adult panel, The Kids Are All Right. Thanks, Ash.
How's it going, gentle friends? Is everyone having a good time? I hope so. I know I am. All right, so I'm going to introduce our panelists, and when I say their names, they're going to wave at you so that you guys know who I'm talking about. So alphabetical order so that I don't have to make any gendered distinctions. We're going to go with Nathan Burgoine. Hi, Nathan.
Hello.
And then we have J. Marshall Freeman. This is Jonathan's first panel, so everyone be really nice to him. But look at how great he's doing. He's sitting up straight. He's not touching his face. We're very proud of him. And then we have Nan Higgins. Hi, Nan. Everyone. And Stevie Mikayne. All right, so today we are talking about NA and YA fiction. Most people know what YA is. It's young adult. But if you don't know what NA is, that's new adult. So we have a handful of titles out right now that are new adult, and that generally means we're looking at college age. So it's kind of 2.0 of YA. We get sexy times sometimes. We get language that you don't necessarily get in YA. But we also get deeper topics and themes or different approaches to those themes. So we're going to start with everyone telling us about the book they are currently focused on, that's YA or NA, and I'm going to show you guys the covers while they talk. So let's start with Nathan.
Hi, so my most recent YA was Exit Plans for Teenage Freaks, which was actually my first and only YA thus far. So yeah, it's about a young kid, Cole. He's just about to graduate high school, which in Canada makes him 17. And he's got his whole life sort of planned. He's very much a planner. He lives and dies by his to-do lists and his bullet journal. And then right before, 2 weeks before school's out, he develops a teleportation problem, which was definitely not on the menu. So that's Exit Plans.
All right. And John Marshall, I know you don't have a cover yet, but it's
actually, I do have one. Should I do a cover reveal here? I have a printout.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Let me orient this. Here is the cover of The Dubious Gift of Dragon Blood, which is backwards. Great. Okay, so it's a backwards cover reveal. The Dubious Gift of Dragon Blood follows the adventures of a 16-year-old high school student named Crispin, who juggles a lot of identities. He's semi-out at school, although not officially out to his parents. He's of different racial backgrounds. And then he finds out that he also carries the blood of dragons in his veins. And he is asked to go on an important mission to the realm of fire, where the fire dragons rule, a place he's never heard of. So it's very much a book, an adventure book, a dragon book, but also a book about figuring out who you are in a swirling maelstrom of identities.
All right. And that comes out in December. So
on December 15th, yeah.
We're very excited. All right. Nan, why don't you tell us about The Morticians Daughter?
Yeah, The Morticians Daughter just came out on Tuesday. It's my second book with Bold Strokes Books. And it's about Arya. She is just getting ready to turn 22, and she has her whole life planned out. She's a singer, and her career is on the verge of exploding. And then on the night of her 22nd birthday, she sees her father talking with who she learns later is a ghost, and realizes she comes from a long line of people in her family who can communicate with ghosts, and now she's being asked to give up her planned career and life to go into service for her father's company, Aftercore, that helps ghosts cross over to their new life.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
All right, and then finally we have Stevie Mikayne. Tell us about Jellicle Girl.
Well, Jellicle Girl, it's second release. So it was released originally in 2012. So this is my fourth book with Bold Strokes, but it's my first ever published book and my only one that would fit kind of in the YA new adult genre. I struggle with where to put it because, as you say, you know, the protagonist Beth is 17, which in modern day Canada should mean that she's about ready to graduate high school. But because the book is placed in the 90s, it means she is early graduating high school. So we have kind of the cusp of adulthood in that Beth attends university. And then there's all those themes that you talked about, Ashley, the sex, the drugs, the swearing, you know, all of those things that you would never see in YA, but definitely kind of fit in the new adult theme. So Beth is an interesting character. She's probably one of my favorites in that she's extremely edgy and troubled and has a lot of different issues that she needs to work through from her past and some trauma that she's trying to overcome, but in fairly unhealthy ways and mostly alone.
All right. Well, since we've just learned that many of you write in multiple age groups, I want to start by talking about how you shift between age groups when you're writing. How does your tone shift? What sort of mindset do you need to be in when you are writing an adult novel versus a YA or an NA novel? So let's start with Nan.
You know, it is a really different mindset. My first book was an adult contemporary, and it's a lot different. I'm fortunate I work for my day job. I work in a really young industry. A lot of the people that I work with, it's their first job right out of college. I also have a teenage son. I have two sons, but one's, I think, getting in that mindset, I kind of surround myself with a lot of the things that they're interested in, the things that we talk about together. And actually, when I wrote The Morticians Daughter, I sat in my son's room to write it, kind of get that like younger vibe. So anything I can do, the music that I listen to is younger, things that I maybe watch or read, I try to surround myself with that and engulf myself in that when I'm doing that kind of writing.
All right. Jonathan, I know that you have published some short stories that I believe are adult fiction. Mm-hmm. So tell us about how you approach that.
I guess I don't think of books as being specifically YA. I think that is more of a demographic or a publicity, a publicity way of thinking. So I just, for me, it's being character based. So I'm writing it in a 16-year-old's voice, therefore it becomes by default YA. I guess there are some thoughts about how often I drop an F-bomb or the way I depict sexuality. It's never anything that's supposed to be titillating, but it is a discussion about, it's sometimes been explicit discussion about sexuality. But yeah, I'm thinking, so I guess I am thinking a bit about the genre, but mostly I let the character lead.
All right. Stevie, what about you?
I think I agree a lot with what Jonathan is saying. I really struggle to kind of stay within genre lines. So I've been lucky in that I've never had to switch back. So Jellicle Girl was my first book. I was probably about 19 when I started the first draft. So I was kind of already in that headspace and then just continued there through the revisions. But I have since gone on to write, adult mystery, which has a lot, more explicit sexual content and things like that. Then went on to write literary fiction and again adopted kind of the voice of a 16-year-old girl. But I'm not thinking YA in that aspect, right? I'm not thinking to myself, okay, I need to make this kind of fit into this box. So I think that it's definitely just about being very accurate in your portrayal of the character.
All right. Nathan, I know that you have written quite a bit of adult fiction. and it is very adult.
Yes. So I've written erotica, literary fiction, sci-fi, romance. This YA was almost an accident out of a contest at the Bold Strokes retreat of all things. So for me, I mean, I'm a man in my 40s. So when I was a high schooler and I was queer and I was aware, I certainly wasn't out. I would have had a completely different experience than what kids are having now. So I think for me, I did a lot of what Nan did, where I actually reached out to a lot of queer young organizations and schools, and that was almost a disaster over and over again, because then it's like, hi, I'm an adult gay male. May I speak to your queer children, please? Because you can imagine how well that went over, right? But in the end, the feedback I got through those interactions really helped me realize how much was exactly the same. And what was different. And the different stuff wasn't too hard to shift my mindset to, because now I am surrounded by queer people. And I was writing a character in a school where he is out and does have queer friends and a whole rainbow crew. So I specifically reached out to GSAs and rainbow clubs to get sort of what they're doing, how they talk, how they work. And that was the only part I was really worried about. So I thought, I remember what it's like to feel that way, but what is it like through the lens of a contemporary kid in school was something that was a bit out of my reach. And that's why it took me so long to even try.
Well, I can tell you that I have recommended it to quite a few of my students. It's very hard to find YA that you can recommend to kids knowing that it's going to be appropriate. And what I liked that you did is you gave him such a broad group of friends. And I think a lot of queer kids experience that when they are out. Yeah. And obviously not all queer kids are able to. All right, we're going to go over to an audience question. I'm not great at reading out loud, so we're going to bear with me. Okay, this is from Megan Cooper. Do you intentionally write a book to be new adult genre, or do you write your book and find it is categorized that way? Do you think that the category helps with getting the reader's attention, or may keep some readers from trying it because they aren't familiar with the category, or mix it up with YA? So, Stevie, I want you to answer this one first, just because you are talking about that cusp.
Oh, I had so much trouble with Jellicle Girl. I mean, it fits into literary fiction, and it fits into new adult fiction, and maybe kind of fits into YA fiction. I like YA fiction. So as an adult reader, my first intro to queer lit at all was Julianne Peters' Keeping You a Secret. And so I will just devour all YA literature, and I like it. But I think at first, I had the perception of YA being kind of like Twilight, which I also kind of liked when I was younger, but I can see it being a barrier. So on one hand, I think that, recognizing what genre your book belongs into helps you in a lot of ways. It helps you with like your cover design. It helps you reach an audience that already knows what it likes. It can kind of open your eyes as a writer too. And, when you realize that readers, they know your work kind of better than you do. They're like, no, this is where it belongs, and let's put it there. So I think it can kind of be a double-edged sword. Like, yes, it can help you find your readership, but if it's labeled in a way that maybe it belongs in two different categories and it leans toward one, it could actually exclude some readers. But I think maybe that's why it's important as readers that we explore a lot of different genres, even maybe ones we're not that familiar with, because I've found things that I love that I didn't expect to. So.
And Nan, what's your experience with that?
For me, it's a little different because I'm such a new writer. So when I got signed with Bold Strokes for my first novel, I was already about halfway finished writing The Morticians Daughter. So I didn't have any thought into marketing, or, I was still just writing because I loved it at that point without any thought of anything else. But so for me, it was the story came first. It was this pinnacle moment in my character's life, and it just made sense for it to happen at a younger age. But now I'm really interested in exploring different things, and since I got signed with BSB, I've had teacher friends reach out to me and ask me to please write YA stuff because they're always looking for things to put in their classrooms for all their kids, but especially for their queer kids who are looking for examples that they can find of themselves in what they're reading. So, you know, I don't know, it's something that I definitely am thinking a lot more about now, but for me, it all just happened in a more organic way. So now is the time when I'm starting to think about that.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Guys, do you want to answer, or you don't want to take a stab at it?
So before I was an author, I was a bookseller for about 20 years. And the category thing is, I think it's a catch-22. I don't think there's a solution. I don't think there's a good answer. So you have readers who will walk in, they walk into their section of the bookstore or their section of the library, and getting them out of that is really hard. And then you have the people that will walk in and just not touch a particular section, and they're just not going to do it. You cannot, drag that person out of mystery or drag that person into mystery, whatever. So I think in my head, I just don't want to break the contract with the reader. So if I'm calling something sci-fi, or if I'm calling it YA, or I'm calling it romance, each of those things has a very specific sort of rule set that comes with it. And like with romance, if you don't have a happy ever after, you cannot call it a romance or a happy for now. And with YA, I think if you're not writing a story about someone navigating big things for the first time, I'm not sure you're writing a YA. So I think that's where I come into it. Like I look at what the major genre conventions are, and I hold to those. And that's my way of hoping it gets in the right hands.
I think we all have a responsibility to do that to some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that's a very good approach, because what does YA do best? It takes you through the experiences of that time, which are so cataclysmic, and that's what's exciting about writing it too, because you're writing these first times. So yeah, that's a good way of saying it dovetails with the time, with the age of the characters.
So since we are talking about genre, all of you guys write in subgenres. So would you first identify as YA, NA, adult, or as genre authors? Are you drawn to sci-fi or horror or mystery, or do you identify as queer authors? And where would you like your books to be shelved ultimately?
So I always jokingly refer to myself as a tall queer guy who writes short queer fiction most of the time. And I say that if people ask me what I write, I generally answer that I write queer speculative fiction. And that goes in YA or romance or whatever. Most of my stuff has that element of spec fic. So that's an easy enough answer, because that's generally, if the queer isn't going to gatekeep them in or out, then the spec fic will. And so that's sort of the order I look at it. Because I know, unfortunately, the reality for most of us is if you mention that you're writing queer fiction, people are immediately going to have a strong reaction one way or the other. So I lead with it, because if I don't, I'm probably just going to upset a reader, and I'd rather them not read it than read it and be upset.
What about the rest of you guys?
I'm very comfortable saying that I'm an SFF or spec fic writer, because that's the level of metaphor, of kind of broad strokes metaphor that I like to write in. So I rarely write something that's called literary fiction. And then because my interest is in queer things, I'm drawn there. I want one copy in each of the sections, one copy of the same book in each of the sections, because I think they're equally valid ways of entering it.
No.
Where do you find your book? Everywhere.
I want mine on the front table when you walk into chapters. Then we don't have to worry about where it belongs in which section, because it's just there for you to buy, and you should buy it because it's right in front of you. But excellent. Yeah, right? I mean, you don't even have to worry about it after that. I love literary fiction. So literary fiction is my first love in life, but I always have queer characters, and usually queer protagonists. So I would say I'm an author first, a queer author, and then whatever genre. I write kids books, mystery novels. So, I mean, I think that part, that's where the contract comes in with your reader, right? It's going to be important to them. It's not as important to me. I'm a writer, I'm a queer writer. But then genre-wise, that's kind of a backseat.
And Nan?
I think for me, queer writer is first and foremost. So far, that's the only thing my books have had in common. My first book was contemporary fiction. Morticians Daughter is like a paranormal mystery NA book, and the story I'm working on now is a romance. So I'm kind of all over the place. So it's the one strand that connects everything.
All right, well, I'm going to go back over to our Q&A. We've got a comment that ties in nicely with one of my questions. So Jackie Meyer says, the research aspect is what I find most difficult for contemporary YA. And you guys mentioned this a little bit earlier, talking to younger people. But how do you address ever-changing technology, social media, pop culture, language in your writing? And even if you're not writing something contemporary, you still have to be able to speak to those various themes if you're promoting YA or NA. So how do you guys do that? How do you stay young online?
I guess because I'm interested. I'm interested in youth culture at different times, and I like to know what's going on with the speed of online culture, with whatever apps are happening now, with the TV programs. I'm a comics fan, so I'm interested in what young people are reading in comics. Sometimes I'm reading the same things often, but at the same time, I think it's a bit of a trap to make your book of this moment where this happens to be the hot thing in this 6 months. I mean, I solved that by getting my character off Earth as quickly as possible into a place where he kind of have more pure concerns, but he's still a character of 2020.
I'm going to pick on you guys if you don't volunteer.
So I think it was Greg Haran at a panel I went to once who said that he keeps his stories set in the nebulous now. And I've always sort of liked that. That said, sometimes world events happen or major events happen. So like he writes most of his stories set in New Orleans. Well, Katrina happened. So suddenly his stories are pre or post, right? One thing that happened to me in mine, and it's just one line in there, is just he talks about how people had, so Cole one of his friends has asked him about the difference between pansexual and bisexual, and he honestly doesn't quite know, like he sort of half knows. So he goes to look it up online, and his only major understanding of it after is that people have really loud Tumblr wars about the difference. And then Tumblr basically blew up after that. I'm like, oh crap. So there's that one dated reference in there where now Tumblr is basically not queer anymore. And I'm like, ah, crap. But you can't help it. Like that's going to happen. It's like, if you reread some of the YA from 10 or 50 years ago, and they're talking about, finding their flipping open their phone, stuff like that. It's like, there's going to be lines that sneak through. And I don't think if you keep the emotionality and the character interactions as the most important thing, I think the science and tech readers will forgive it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think you're very much correct in that.
I want to talk about that flip phone because that actually was something that came up with the re-release of Jellicle Girl when I sent it to my editor, Cindy, in its kind of 2012 form. There were certain aspects of it where she was like flagging things in the margin. She's like, why is this person using the yellow pages? Like, I don't understand, this reference to whatever. And I was like, you know what? It's because it was written in the 90s. I took out all of those references for its first publication so that it wouldn't date it. But now here we are in 2020. I mean, like, we're legitimately looking back on 1999 as it is in the past now. So I had a lot of fun kind of ramping up those references. Like I was adding back in the Y2K thing and, how this was such an expensive flip phone that she was getting, at the age of 17 or first phone ever. And, but she's definitely still using, the yellow pages and the internet sort of just, this giant power and screen and whatever. And so that was really fun, is to kind of like look back on my college days and go, what was I using? Oh yeah, like Napster, remember that? Those were making their way in. So I'm like, but again, it's relevant enough in the present day. But I feel like that's because we are legitimately a generation, like it's full generation. So if it were, I'm talking about my iPhone 4, I think that's a bit different.
That's why it's actually kind of dangerous to try to be super contemporary, because people will accept something that, oh, I see, this took place 12 years ago. 15 years ago, oh, we're capturing that moment in time. But if you're a little bit off, then you just look dated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true. And for my day job, I work in IT, and so it's a little bit intuitive for me in terms of including like the latest things, the most cutting edge things, and I have to really pull back on that in my writing, because for that very reason, I don't want to date myself or my story. I want it to feel more authentic. So it's more about including those things in an organic and authentic way without it being so specific that it is distracting.
So this one will be a surprise to some of you because one of you sent me this question. But I want to talk a bit about consent and sexual agency.
Nathan is looking guilty.
You know where it came from. Obviously, consent is important and has always been important. In this moment, I think it is more so. So what is our responsibility as authors, especially when we're writing to younger audiences, in representing sexual consent and how sexual agency should be? We'll start with Jonathan, because he started us.
I asked the question.
I'm sorry, Nathan. I apologize.
I did feel a sense of responsibility in writing the book, because there was, I'll give you two places it came from. One, I read a very, very, very successful and popular queer YA book, which I won't name right now. And I said, wait a minute, that was the moment where they should have had sex, and it doesn't make sense that it was left out. And if I was a young reader, I'd be saying, oh, why was that left out? Maybe I shouldn't talk about that. Maybe I can't own that part. Maybe that part of my feelings isn't good. It's okay to say I'm gay, but it's not okay to talk about sex. So part of it was, no, that we have to talk about that. And another thing was reading the work of Peggy Orenstein. At that time, I'd read her book Girls and Sex, and recently read Boys and Sex. And just watching the way that young people are not focusing on consent and on pleasure, but rather using sex for social capital or to hang on to someone. In my book, the main character, and so in my book, the main character starts off in this totally exploitative sex relationship with a jock who's totally closeted, but he kind of rounds it up to love because that's what he's got. And in the course of the book, he gets a boyfriend who's like, no, this is something we do together. And yeah, there was definitely something I felt was missing, at least in some of the more mainstream landscape, and I wanted that in the book.
Have any of the rest of you changed the way that you are writing queer desire for younger audiences? Have you introduced any of those conversations in ways that you hadn't before?
So I did sort of walk up to that scene. I wrote a very PG YA, and I did do it purposefully, but even with that, and I actually need to give props to my editor Jerry here, because we bounced this part back and forth I think a few times. There's a scene where the two boys are really feeling it, and they sort of kind of, Cole kind of leans in for a moment. He's not really sure what's going on here. And I wrote it very clearly with Malik calling a halt, and being like, I really do like you. I don't know if I'm ready for more. If I'm ever ready for more, I'll let you know. And then we turned that into sort of a cute moment later, where Cole's not in the right headspace, and they're talking about something else, and all the bad stuff's just happened, and Malik turns to him and just says, more, and he's like, sorry, what? And it takes him a second to realize they now have a language where they can say to each other. So I really wanted to write something like that in, because I'm a nerd. I'm a giant nerd. So for me, when it came to language for this teen, I wanted to make him that lovely, wonderful, sweet spot between having his own kind of language about things and communicating with his friends in a way that people outside are like, I don't know those people. But within is actually this loving and wonderful, like, joining language. So that was where I was coming at it from. But coming from the world of romance, consent is huge and is a hill I will die on. So yeah, I definitely wanted there to be a moment where someone said no, and that was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nan, how have you handled this?
I love this conversation. I had in The Morticians' Daughter a it's an NA book, so I felt like I could go a little bit further with the sex scene, but it was happening in a moment where there was a lot of other drama going on, so it wasn't as involved as the conversations that my other two contemporaries have talked about, but there was a check-in. Are you sure that this is okay? Are we doing this together? Are we in this together for the right reasons? You know, and it was a sweet moment, and it's something that I think about a lot. So yeah, I think it's a really important conversation to have, and I think that in the moment writing what I was writing, it took the right turn for me and for the story.
All right, Stevie, so we're talking just about the age of consent with yours.
I have so many thoughts. I'm going to try and keep my response coherent. I think that in Jellicle Girl in particular, we're kind of in tricky territory because Beth is sort of closeted, but is really acting out against her queerness. And she finds herself in situations where she has given consent. She has actively pursued sexual situations that then make her very uncomfortable. So I think that that's something that I wanted to write about, was that even though you say it's okay, later on inside your head, it cannot be okay anymore. So what I love about this is when she kind of finally figures out who she is and who she wants to be with, those interactions are a lot more equitable. There's a lot more conversation between her and the girl in question. And I think, you know, that's really important. Also, I'm a mom and I have a young daughter, and we homeschool. We homeschooled before it was cool, like before everyone was doing it. We were original homeschoolers. But I think that there are so many things that children are not taught that they need to be explicitly taught. And all those things surrounding consent, body image, your personal space, what you say about your body and how you feel about other people being around you, like all of those things are conversations you need to have with your kids, just like, you know, emotional education. I'm feeling angry. This is what I'm going to do when I feel angry. All those things that you don't necessarily have time for at school or aren't necessarily taught at school are the responsibility of parents. And so, I mean, consent starts super, super early. And I think it's fine even to have that in children's literature. Like, he wanted to hold my hand and I didn't want that to happen. So I said no, you know? So I don't think it needs to be a huge drastic conversation or, you know, Jerry Springer moment of every book, but I think it needs to be there every single step, and it can start a lot earlier than we think.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to go over to a reader question. This one's from Gina, and she says, I have a 13-year-old F to M foster son. Is there a book you recommend as an introduction to queer literature? So I would imagine we are also looking at trans-specific queer literature.
Off the top of my head, Two Boys Kissing springs to mind. Because it had a wide range of boys, including trans boys. In the title, it's about two kids who are trying to break the longest kiss. These two boys, and they do it kind of as a protest against something that happens at their school. But at the same time, you have all these other stories happening as well. I'm trying to think if I've read any other trans boy specific YA, and I feel like I'm coming up blank. I don't know if anyone else has any.
I feel like we got one in our swag bag at the Lammys a couple of years ago, and I can see the cover. I'm trying to look it up right now, but if I can't, we'll post in the comments. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just in general, what do you guys think would be the best introduction to queer literature for a 13-year-old?
Am I allowed to just say anything written by an actual queer person?
Yes. Yes.
Like,
yes.
Because I mean, it's a bit of a bugaboo for me, but I mean, you know, I'm kind of maybe jumping in, but do you all remember the first character you read that was like you? And was it necessarily a good character? Because mine sure wasn't, right? And then, like, when there are queer books out there, like there were queer books out there when I was a teen, absolutely, but they were kept away from me. So I feel like if you can find the queer titles written by queer authors, you're at least in safer waters.
when I was young, I was reading queer characters that were in adult books. I think the first queer book written by a queer person about a queer young person was Boys on the Rock by John Fox, which was an amazing book about a 16-year-old. Probably it's influenced me subconsciously. That was a long time ago. He died of AIDS after his first book.
I am younger than some people, which means
Here,
I did not.
That was great.
So my first queer novel was the first in Radcliffe's honor series. My parents provided queer books at every step of the way. So even before I was seeing myself in literature, I was reading the Weetsy Bat books. So I had positive queer representation. That's a good one, not a queer author, but a world that includes queer people just because they do exist. Nan, what was your first queer book that you saw yourself in?
The first queer book that I read, I was on vacation with my family, and we went into an old thrift store, and I found a copy of Tales of the City by Armistead Maupin, and I was like my tiny little queer, like closeted self. I just read it over and over again, and it wasn't for kids or anything, but just being able to read about characters who were out and living their lives was amazing. So I want to go along with the rest of you and say any book written by a queer author, I think it's so important to be able to see, as a young person, to see yourself in characters who aren't a punchline, who aren't a stereotype, written by people who are queer, who want to give their characters as much authenticity as possible. It's so important. So yeah.
The only trans-focused YA book that I can think of, I don't think was written by a queer or trans author, and that was The Art of Being Normal by Lisa Williamson. I thought it was a good book, but I'm not necessarily the right person to answer that.
We will definitely post a few recommendations, especially for young teens. I know that's really hard to find YA that doesn't include a whole bunch of F-bombs and blowjobs, let's be honest. And you don't want to give that necessarily to a young teen. So we'll make sure that we post some recommendations. I've got one more question from my list. What do you imagine should be the role of authors in incorporating marginalized voices in novels, especially if the author doesn't belong to certain marginalized groups? What obligation do we have to depict a world that is not white or cis or able-bodied? And what responsibilities do we take on when including those voices? That was a lot of questions. I apologize.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm back on my PhD panel. I feel like that was a question that was answered, and asked over and over again. How do you write as the other without appropriating the experience of the other? And, I feel like I answered that for like half an hour. But again, we are writing kind of the new world. And I think, we've seen over the past couple of years, even more than before, how easy it is to erase people who are not clearly visible everywhere, and how important it is that, we see ourselves, in literature, in movies, kind of giving hope to the young generation that's coming up that, you are also considered normal. It's not just like the normal people and then the other people. We are all kind of together. And that's what I love about British TV. It's just kind of like everyone is, like they've got it good over there. For me, I was a special needs teacher, so I feel like a lot of my books incorporate people with disabilities, various disabilities, visible, invisible.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have experience as a person of color. I don't have experience as a trans person. My otherness is my queerness, so I kind of, do that to the best of my ability and what I know, and try not to tread into territory that I don't know anything about.
On some levels, it seems there's kind of a straightforward rule I give myself, which is the world around me is full of diverse people who are differently abled, people who are of different sexualities, different identities. So if I didn't include them, I actually wouldn't be writing about the world I live in. And then the flip side is I can't center a book on the experience of transness or being a person of color. But if I don't include it, then what is this fictional world I'm writing about where everyone's an Anglo-Saxon or something?
Yeah, I feel really strongly about this topic. My sons are biracial, and I've seen firsthand what it means to them to have a character in a book or a TV show that looks like them, and that they can look up to. So it's really important. And so it's a conversation that I have with a lot of the people in my life, the people of color and other able people. And I feel like there's such a fine line between honoring a culture and appropriating a culture, and I never want to cross that line. So I feel like the conversations that I've had have been, include people who look like us in your books. It's wonderful that you do that, but don't tell a story about what it means to be a Black person, because you can't do that. And so I feel like those were the guidelines that I was given in the conversations that I've had, and that's what I try to follow in my writing.
I think everyone said pretty much everything I was going to say, but I will add to that my biggest job as a writer is also to read. So to find own voice stories, so that I'm not just reading more cis, white, able-bodied stories over and over and over again. For exit plans, one of the things I did very consciously was include Cole's father is deaf, and verbal, and runs a team interpretation business. And I did that because I'm just involved enough in the deaf community that I could do that one step removed and feel somewhat confident about it. And so it also gave Cole a great anchor point and a wonderful relationship with his dad that I don't think you get to see very often in YA. So I was doing that very purposefully. But again, I didn't tell a story about being deaf. I told a story about a kid who has a deaf father.
I actually really liked how you did that, because it also taught your audience how to approach people who are not necessarily normative. So it says, okay, so this person is deaf, this is how we talk to them. And I think that we are missing a lot of that in the stories, and what we're producing now includes a lot more conversation that needs to be had like that. Okay, I'm going to give a quick shout out. We're doing a flash sale of everyone's books. It, I think, is active as of 2 minutes ago. 20% off of YA only ebooks, but you can see the coupon code in the chat, and we're also posting it online right now. So go buy books, guys. There's nothing else to do.
Literally nothing else.
Yes.
And if you like time travel, you can transport yourself 6 months in advance and buy my book too.
All right, so I'm curious, because you guys have all mentioned interacting with different kinds of media. So what sort of media do you like to watch television shows or listen to music to help you understand younger audiences? Or do you use it as a way to get yourself in the right headspace?
It's a headspace thing for me, for sure. The understanding, I think so much of my understanding comes through just the writing of it helps me understand. But so I think for me, it's getting myself in that space.
There's a rhythm thing for me with understanding the rhythm of language on Twitter or the rhythms of TikToks. So that I find that like endlessly fascinating, how rhythm and more than just the actual words, but there's kind of a speed that informs the writing, and I find that really exciting. So I try to consume that medium, those media.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks, especially because I have a husky who wants to be walked about 700 times a day. So when I'm listening to YA, there are some amazing YA performers, like the people who read, perform the YA, and the thing Jonathan was just talking about, the cadence of the language, that was something I was really paying attention to. And then also I'm lucky enough that I'm of an age where a lot of my friends who are parents, they have teenagers now. So I had this great, I have a walking buddy, or I had a walking buddy before the plague, She and I would walk our dogs together once a day, and we're both introverts, so it was all the conversation we needed for the day. But we would talk, and she gave me a lot of candid information about her son that I'm sure he doesn't know. But he was the right age, and so some of the frustrations and things he was facing, and she does this spit perfect impersonation of her son. And many of those lines, I was like, I need to talk to him. So I did talk to him first. I said, do you mind if I use this phrase or this turn of phrase? And he was like, oh no, go ahead. So yeah.
There's really no better source than
No.
Actual people, yeah.
All right, so then final question. What is the most important thing that YA or NA can accomplish socially, but also for each of you personally? And I've stumped you. I broke all of you.
You should have done that first.
I think we've covered a lot.
Final question.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of that in terms of presenting a world that's aspirational in its diversity, in terms of centering issues that we feel are important for young people that maybe we feel are lacking in the education that they're getting, in the media that the mainstream media.
I think I have an answer, and it's from something Stevie said and also something you said, Ashley.
We don't have to answer. Perfect.
We don't inherit our culture, right? Queer people, we don't get that from our parents for the most part, or the vast majority of us, right? So it's not like I had queer parents and queer grandparents telling me what it was like for them at the time. And so fiction is one of the only ways that we have to pass our stories on to another generation that isn't broken. And that they can maybe find. So I think the more of it, the more of our stories we put out there, it will create that marginalized history, because otherwise it's like, let's be honest, it's not being taught. Like if you go to the schools, what is taught is pretty narrow, and like you've got Canada celebrating 50 years since decriminalization, and that's not really what happened. So like all that sort of stuff, if we don't tell that story, no one else is gonna.
Well, because we are the queer parents, right? And I think that that's what's dawned on me now that I'm now 36 years old, that we're the moms and dads on the sidelines of Pride giving hugs to all the teenagers whose parents don't accept them, right? Like we are the queer elders. So, sorry. But in the absence of, generations of queerness, I can teach my daughter a lot of things. But if she grows up straight, we're not going to have that in common, and it's something that you need a parent to teach you a lot of the time. So that's kind of our method, I guess, for me as a mother and as an author, reaching out to the youth and just being like, hey, I've been there and it gets better, I swear.
Yeah. It's an opportunity too to write things the way that you'd like them to be, and I think that that's great, especially for young people. They might not be getting.
Oh no, we've lost Nan. It's a tragic moment, guys.
She's not just lost in thought. No,
it's a real bummer. Nan, we miss you.
I think we get the sentiment.
I think there is definitely that element of diaspora when we don't have our culture handed down in the same ways. Oh, Nan, you're back.
Oh,
are you back? Hi.
Hey.
You can finish your thought now.
Oh no.
I don't know where we lost you.
Oh, okay. I was just saying it's an opportunity. We have an opportunity to write an idealized version of how we'd like for things to be. I know what it was like being a young queer person, and I would hope that it's better now. I'm 42 years old, so I'm hoping, these generations later, it's better, but it's still not as good as it could be for a lot of young people, and it's a real opportunity to give them a better version of what it's like to be queer, how things could be and can be later.
And I think there is that element of being able to build a culture and keep that culture going, because our culture specifically is different than heteronormative culture. The way that we age is different, the way that we experience those milestones in life. And I think that YA and NA give us that temporality in a different way, where heterosexual kids are learning how to date in high school and how to fuck in college, then queer kids aren't going through those same steps. And I think that the stories that we are producing give them some sort of guideline. Okay, it's all right for me to feel this way now, or I'm not strange if I'm having these thoughts, and they can't necessarily ask the elders that are provided to them. All right, any final thoughts, friends?
Thank you for having us. It was amazing. That was great. I can't believe that was 50 minutes.
Really
Wonderful
interesting.
job moderating.
Yes, thank you.
You guys were fantastic panelists. We'll just give a final shout out to J. Marshall Freeman and his very first.
Thank you. You all made it very easy. Great job, Ashley.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.